From beyond the farthest reaches of our galaxy they come. Two brains pulsing with a strange energy. These space brains come to share their love of science fiction movies.
Hi, and welcome to Space Brains, the show where we joy watch sci-fi movies and then talk about what was good and what was great. I'm Surrey, and this is Mark.
Hiya, it's episode 73, and we are talking about science fiction film The Shape of Water. Came out in 2017. In this episode, we'll reveal what we thought about the film, the ins and outs of narrative and film language, plus a nice deep dive. And Surrey, this film is full of water into a specific piece of science that the filmmakers are proposing. Oh gosh, now I've got to pronounce Guillermo del Toro's name.
Guillermo.
I died. I looked this up on YouTube. I said it earlier, better on my video. Del Toro. I'm going to just call him Del Toro from here on in. And Vanessa Taylor worked together on the script of this film. So check it out where you can before we go any further, because...
Warning, turn back now if you haven't seen this film, because we are going to go all through it, and there will be spoilers. So go watch it, and then tune back in.
Warning. So basically, A Shape of Water is based at a top secret research facility somewhere in the 1960s, although they don't actually say it's the 60s. And we have a lonely janitor who forms a unique relationship with an amphibious creature that is being held in captivity. So what was your number one takeaway from The Shape of Water, Surrey?
My number one takeaway from The Shape of Water is that you can tell a lot about a man, about when he washes his hands, either before or after he does his business.
Oh my goodness, that is such a good line in this film. Hey, I loved that line.
It is a confusing line because I listened to it and I thought, you're saying it like that's somehow significant, but I don't get it.
Well, no, because he was saying you can tell a lot about a man if he washes his hand before or after, but not if it's both. And so to me, there's it's a nice symbolic element of who that character is, like him, the colonel. I think he was a colonel, wasn't he, or something?
No, he was I can't remember. Oh, maybe he was. I thought the other guy was, but anyway.
No, the other guy was General Hoyt, his boss.
He had five stars, count them. That means I can do whatever the damn hell I want.
Anyway, to me, it was telling you a lot about his, level of control in his role. But when I first saw this film, that line stuck with me, even days after. I'm like, yeah, should I wash my hands before or after or both? What does it really, it's just such a powerful line.
No, it reminds me, it's basically is it a joke? Maybe it's a joke I heard, which is to say that this Frenchman and a Spanishman are talking, and the Frenchman basically indicates that he washes his hands before he touches himself to go to the toilet, because some sort of respect ritual. There's a cleansing before going to the toilet, because the old Johnson there is important. And then also he goes to the toilet with his hands on his hips. This guy. Was his name Strickland? Yeah. And it's such a, what you might call it, an alpha male move,
Yeah.
I'm going to aggressively go to the toilet without touching.
Yeah.
And I'm only going to wash my hands before I go.
Yeah.
And all of these things are him thinking he's somehow, imprinting some level of superiority, but you can tell from the cleaning women's reactions that they're just more confused as to why he would be saying and doing these things.
Yeah, it's all about him as a character being in control, in power, and even weeing in front of them. This film does have a lot of being the 60s, there's a lot of differences maybe to our society today. But I mean, it's extremely inappropriate that he went in front of them and he was very much exerting his authority, wasn't he? And
Yes.
but then not only that, in saying, it's all, you can tell a lot about a man if he washes his hands before or after, but not both. Both means he's not quite right. He's got to make a decision. It's a great line. I loved that line. When I first saw this movie, it really stuck with me.
Okay, well, it was my number one takeaway. So what was this movie? Was it a hope, warning, or an experiment?
To me, it's a hope, because really, no matter what human or humanity throw at each other, and whether that's sexism, racism, homophobia, or even love between different people, humanity kind of perseveres. So we were just talking about Strickland. He's the powerful authority. I mean, he's got the whole US government behind him, we presume. Like you just said that General Holt says, these 5 stars mean I can do whatever the hell I want. These guys are the guys in power. That toilet scene, he's exerting his power over the protagonist, who's just a cleaner. She's a woman, she's a cleaner, she's got no authority in this organization, and yet she is the one that understands the creature more than anyone and evades them by pulling the creature out of their facility and getting him back into the wild. Like, it shows you what the little person can do, the underdog. And so to me, I think it is a story of hope, because the hopelessness is our society dominating each other. And this film has some really subtle, really subtle attitudes, those attitudes of the man versus the woman, gay people being mistreated, in this case, African Americans versus white Americans, and then also just the traditional male versus female. That Strickland, I mean, he's a bad guy, but he's authoritative to everyone, including his wife, isn't he? So it's all about sort of like domination from society, but yet the cleaning lady's the one that is the winner at the end of the day. And it's a great underdog story, and to me that just means hope.
That and the Cadillac salesman, who totally dominates Strickland.
Yes.
I found that scene to be revealing as well about Strickland and his insecurity. Well, the fact that because this movie is a bit about incomplete people. Yeah. So people who cannot find that part of themselves that they need in society. The artist can't find a partner, presumably a gay partner. Yeah. Although I guess it's not strictly spoken, but we're smart enough, I think. Yeah. And Eliza, it's not even that she's missing her voice. Like, that doesn't seem to bother her, but rather she's sort of, what is she doing? She's essentially a spinster living with a gay artist. Yeah. Like, and her day is just this sort of routine, and she's clearly unfulfilled. And then we've got Strickland, who likewise, he's missing something. It looks like he has all his power in society, but really he's got this anxiety and insecurity, which is taken advantage of by the salesman. He goes in, his wife says, "You deserve a Cadillac," right? And that's like, triggers him, because a Cadillac is a big car. It's a man's car. And so he's actually being controlled by this thing. Mm. And he turns up, and then the salesman talks him into buying the green one, teal, sorry. Even though at first he's like, I don't want a green. Like, look at that. That's, a weak color. But the salesman says, no, it's not. It's a powerful color. And, oh yeah, it is. It's a powerful color. I deserve that. Yeah, that he's missing something as well, looking for what he can get. So it's it's a sort of story, and even the Russian spy, he's craving this knowledge and validation as a scientist, and not just as a a disposable resource in the spy world. So there's three sort of or so units walking around, and at least one of them has the gets completed, which I guess would be the hope.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, isn't it? Because even Strickland, he kind of keeps saying, it's funny his motivation in this film, I found, because, and it makes him so rich, because he says to us he dug this amphibian creature out of the Amazon and brought it all the way back, and then, so he kind of has a bit of power, but then very early in the film, he then loses those two fingers. So he's sort of like, he loses, doesn't he? He loses out. And then we see him with his family, and it's like, he's got the happy little perfect family. In fact, did you notice there's like a correlation between his family and then the family that the artist draws? Like they're the ideal American family, right? Like the two kids, the beautiful wife, the house, the car, everything. And she even brings out Jell-O, which is what they're painting.
Yeah, the like green one.
Yeah.
Yes,
and
I like that.
But then the thing is, but then he keeps also saying that he wants to get the hell out of Baltimore and kind of go to a big city. So it's like he's not content, like, and I
said he's missing his soul. He hasn't. He thinks that he should be more than he is.
Yeah.
He doesn't see what he does have.
And that's a tip for anyone out there. This is a good villain. This is a great villain because he's got problems in his life, right? Like he's got problems. So not only is he in the story to be the bad guy, the villain to our protagonist, but he's actually got his own freaking problems. It's so good when a villain is like this, like it makes it so much more substantial, doesn't it?
Yeah, you don't really feel sympathy for him.
No, you don't at all.
Empathy. You can feel that his villainy is born from a frustration which is being confronted or not confronted, as the case may be, through bad choices.
That's right.
Like, it's not that you're going, oh, I can understand why he's doing this, and oh, poor guy. It's more like, oh, I can understand why he's doing this. It's because he's screwed up. He keeps doing the wrong thing, thinking that he's doing the right thing.
That's right.
And that's what makes him the villain there. Is just, that he's not going to learn a better way. He's going to try to be worse, in fact, because he thinks that that's his ideal place to move to is not one of heroism, it's towards villainy.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's quite good. So this is not the first time you've seen this film.
No, I'd only seen it.
How did you see it the first time, and how did you watch it this time?
I saw it about a year ago, and I really liked it, and so I knew that we'd have to do it one day on Spacebrains. And I didn't really have a lot of context when I first watched it, apart from Del Toro, who I've seen Pan's Labyrinth, which is a terrific film. But I didn't realise even when I watched this that this was an Oscar-winning sort of film, or how good it was going to be. But to me, it's just like when I first sat there and watched this film, I watched it on my own the first time, and it just blew me away. From a film point of view, there's so many good elements. There's these motives. There's a great, like we're just saying, bad guy. There's a really compelling good guy. The crux of the story, or the setup of the story, is not brand new. You could look at this film and it's the same sort of story as E.T. Like, it really is. There's a creature that then befriends the main character, and in befriending the main character, there's a healing that goes on for the main character. And that's basically what happens in this. And there's an authority bad character, the sergeant, the colonel, whatever Strickland bloody is. And there's a system as well built around them. So the actual crux of this is nothing brand new, but I just thought that Del Toro and Vanessa Taylor had really put together a great concept here of this amphibian man And the fact that she falls in love and they sort of take it to a whole nother level that, you know, it's someone in love with this creature. And that's also, you were saying before, she's pretty content in her life, but what she is missing, and there is that scene with the neighbor, she says the amphibian man sees her the way she sees herself. Like, so whereas humans kind of look at her and she's a janitor and she can't speak, this creature doesn't notice that. And so that's what makes her kind of then feel, you know, full. So I think that's her journey, and that's what he gives to her. And then at the end of the film, the fact that he gives her gills, you know, like that's a kind of a really cool, smooth narrative ending to this whole setup. I also thought the amphibian man's kind of like and Del Toro says this as well, if you go online and have a look at, you know, the countless interviews and stuff that are out there about this film. But he also does say, you know, he was very inspired from the creature from the Black Lagoon. And in fact, he pitched this film way back in about 2010 or something. The concept of this film, not so much the way it turned out, but the concept he originally had was, what if we did the creature from the Black Lagoon, but we looked at it from the point of view of the creature? So not the human's point of view. And of course, no one would fund him for that idea.
Is that same but different?
Yeah, same but different, right? Like, that's exactly right. So this time it was my second viewing. My wife watched it with me. This was a film that when I watched it, I'm like, my wife would like this, even though it's got some pretty graphic moments. You know, there's a bit of disturbing elements in it. You know, with Strickland, he does do just some disturbing things. I was like, oh no, she will like this, because it does remind me of E.T., this film. Like, I think it's got a bit of a similar vibe. I know Del Toro wasn't going for that. That wasn't his inspiration, but I can see some similarities going on there. And there's some other films that are like that. Even something like How to Train Your Dragon with Toothless is like this. It's the same sort of story arc. But, you know, here again, same but different. And so this time round, I was watching it a bit closer. I really picked up on the motives. I really picked up on the homage to those old sort of films. I also thought on the second viewing, I noticed the deeper avoidance and the subtleness of things like homophobia, racism, sexism that is embedded in this film. Del Toro is an immigrant as well to America, and you can sort of see that. I think there's a bit of that like discrimination in the film, but it's not screaming at us, oh, discrimination is bad. It's just, it's subtle. It's there, right? Like, it's embedded in the story. Yeah. So I really enjoyed it.
You see some of the other themes in there, like the constant reference to the future. The future is here.
Yeah.
This is the future. We're going to the future. The Jello commercial he was painting was the future is here.
Yeah.
And there's it was mentioned numerous times.
The Cadillac again. Yeah,
and I was trying to sort of pick up what I'm getting at really there. That is what that was sort of meaning.
Well, I think the thing is they were, you know, the military as well. Them and the Russians, right? They were like, this creature might help us send a man to space. And so again, it's the future, isn't it? And then it's like society will be better in the future with future developments. Oh, the latest car will make you feel, you know, it's got all the, you know, when that salesman says all the Cadillac stuff, it's all about the latest and the greatest, and it's going to make you feel like the man you should be. All the successful businessmen have it, you know. And then Strickland wants to get out of Baltimore and go to a big city. It's future. Whereas you take our main character, Elisa, like, she was pretty happy in her environment, wasn't she? You know, she was pretty happy. Like, she didn't really have a major issue being a janitor. And as we'll get into in a minute, like the setup of this film, she wakes up, she has a bath, she masturbates, she cooks her eggs, like, she goes to work. Like, she's pretty happy, isn't she? Like, even on the bus ride.
I don't know. I'd argue that it's not so much happy as she's got a comfortable routine, maybe.
Yeah. Well, maybe. Yeah.
I think there is a certain point there where you realize that, you know, she and, you know, the artist, I can't remember his name, to tell you the truth, poor guy.
Giles.
They share a story arc in there. There's something not quite progressing with their life.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
They're sort of in a holding pattern. They're a bit stale.
Yeah.
They sit there every night and watch musicals together and do a bit of tap dancing.
Yeah, and I mean, he
keeps working on this stupid jelly art.
Yeah, well, he's stuck in the future
over and over.
He's stuck in the future as well, isn't he? Because he is trying to do that art and get back his old job or something. And even that, like, it's, you know, the boss says the client wants photos. The future is photos. You know what I mean? Like, it's, and so he's he's an artist, and he's like, no, they don't want, look how good my art is. And the boss is like, it's great art, but they kind of want photos, you know, like the future is photos. So even he is trying to get to the future and not realizing that the present is pretty good. Yeah, but I do agree with you. It is a bit of a holding pattern. Yeah. So how did the movie make you feel, Surrey?
It made me feel calm. Last episode was Don't Look Up, which made me feel quite anxious.
Yes.
This film had a calm fairy tale feel to it.
It did.
The coloration of it, the introduction of the fishman, the symbology of the use of the pattern of three occurring, like these three characters in three situations, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I do know that Guillermo is a big fairy tale, real world meets mysticism, mystical world sort of guy. I mean, he's done, so we know Pan's Labyrinth, we know this one, but he also wrote the screenplay for The Hobbit and Pacific Rim.
Yep.
And, the Hellboy, he's various bits and pieces. Mimic, if you remember that one. That's back in 97 by the Insects. But, he's done a lot of this on the Strain TV series, which do yourself a favour and watch that. It's a complete series. So, like, as in a complete story arc from first all the way through the end. So it's not one of these ones that just kind of continues on forever, just constantly making up new things. It's actually a complete story, which is great.
And you hit a good note there with Del Toro. It's like the world is quirky and mythical, but then based in some sort of reality. And quite often I haven't seen heaps of his stuff, but if you do think about Pan's Labyrinth, it's the same in this film, that there's that subtle reference to a moment in time. So in here it's like the 60s. So there's like revolutions of gender and race and sexuality. And in Shape of Water, there's references of that, but only in the minor. It's not blasted in our face. And in Pan's Labyrinth, without spoiling it, it's the same sort of thing. Like the girl is in wartime, and it's very much, symbolic of something like World War II. But then we've got this like family dynamic going on that's also abusive, etc. in Pan's Labyrinth. So he kind of always does combine these quirky, mythical fantasy worlds, but still embeds the reality of like historical society into them, doesn't he?
Yeah, but what I did find, because of that sort of fairy tale fantasy sort of feel to it, the anxiety and the drama wasn't from these sort of close scenes. Like the escape of the fishman is relatively smooth.
Yeah.
And it happens before the midpoint of the, you would have thought that would be sort of Act 3.
Yeah.
Where they free Willy, as it were.
Yep.
But and so watching it was nice and soothing, and it had a distinct romantic feel, I suppose, in that you're more interested to see if these characters find happiness than you are to see if they, kill the bad guy and get the girl or the boy in this case.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Did you have a favourite scene?
Favourite scene? I really liked the scene where she fills up the bathroom with water and they're sort of dancing in the water. Like it's a reflection of the opening image, which has the camera sort of going through an apartment building filled with water.
Foreshadowing.
So it's this nice transition from being her world, where he's a part of it, with the bathtub, into being like transferring or transforming her world into their world.
Yeah.
Which, again, using that water metaphor of crossing over, maybe life and death or discovery of new life, if you will. It had this very nice, if you're talking about a romance movie, this was like what I thought was one of the most romantic scenes, was that she would risk her own, environment in order to make it more comfortable. It's like the ball scene from Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
Without the implied violence. Which is kind of, Beauty and the Beast is a bit problematic in places, really, if you look at it. But yeah, that was my favourite scene. And it had just this perfect, filter they had on the camera, like that sort of film grain, and the coloration of those greeny colours and the bluey colours coming through, and his glowing skin.
Yeah.
And they sort of were just having a nice little cuddle and a little dance. It was very nice.
Yeah, it was. It's a beautiful scene, that one, and perfectly timed for the narrative because like she'd brought him back to her place. They were progressing, but then, for him, he's supposed to be in the ocean or the Amazon River. He needs space, doesn't he? And the bath is only so big. So, to kind of allow him a much bigger space when the relationship is also interconnecting. It's a beautiful scene.
Yeah. And how about yourself? Was there anything in particular, the science fiction about this film that you liked?
Well, to me, not so much that they delved into, heavy science in this film. This is not a film where they go heavy into the science. They made a lot of connections to, go into space. That was the point of why they would want to, understand this creature. And I think that was a fair enough parallel. But what I liked was probably the connection to old sci-fi, which again, as I said, Del Toro sort of says the creature from the Black Lagoon. And there's some other references as well that people say online, that if you go watch this film, see what you think, let us know. Did you kind of connect to other stories? But I like that because there was the impression that we were almost, this could, if you remember when we did Metropolis and you've got the kind of crazy scientist. In this one, it's the crazy military, isn't it? And the scientist is actually a bit more down to earth. There's that line in this film where Strickland says, the scientists fall in love with their subject matters. And I mean, he was wrong because the scientist wasn't in love with him. The janitor was. The scientist was, of course, a double agent or whatever you want to call it, and was wanting to take the creature back to Russian soil, wasn't he? But he wanted to be more protective, and so to me it just reminded me a lot of those old, 50s, 60s sci-fi films, and where you kind of got the scientist and you got the creature in the lab, and it's all pretty primal, isn't it? It's all primitive, you and I have looked at a whole bunch of films with spacebrains, and we've seen some modern science, some futuristic science. Even if you go back to, The Beyond, or, what was the Keanu Reeves one where he brought his family back to life?
Was that
Replicas? Replicas. So a lot of that's like the scientist, but it's the futuristic scientist, isn't it? Whereas it's cool to sort of see these old scientists and the military being involved. And, there's that movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still, and those kind of old, even The Blob, where the military seem to get involved. They seem to almost be at blame here, don't they, with the science? So that was the sci-fi part I liked of this film.
Beautiful. I quite liked the linkage into real-world scientific endeavours at the time. At the moment, I'm listening to a podcast about MK Ultra, which was sort of to do with the CIA coming out of World War II, or the OSS, which is I can't remember what OSS stands for, but it became the CIA.
Okay.
The Central Intelligence came out of the some secret service for World War II.
Yeah.
And they were looking at all manner of, they'd taken Nazi scientists and brought them over to the United States.
Yeah.
To do, for example, rocketry, which helped them get to the moon, but also to do any number of experiments or to get information about the experiments that the Nazis conducted, quite cruelly on living people. And this movie, it's in that same sort of era where, the Cold War is very cold, I suppose you'd say. Russians are a real danger. But at the same time, they're sort of pushing these boundaries of science, and they're not being particularly concerned with morality or ethics.
Yeah.
It's kind of, we have an unlimited budget and unlimited scope. The 5-star general was just of the opinion that this was a project he had, and he could basically do whatever he wanted. He made that quite clear. And so I quite like that, as they said, that reminiscent of the old science fiction. I think we miss out a lot in science fiction where we could have more of these 50s or 60s based science fiction where there was a lot of pushing boundaries. Hitler sort of pushed a lot of boundaries during World War II with building new weapons and advancing strange social ideas. But coming out of that, of course, came the nuclear bomb and this optimism about man's capability to progress technology, which we've sort of lost a bit now. It's more like our ability to sell more advertising.
Yeah, that's right.
I suppose, it's almost, we've lost, and even the current space race amongst the billionaires is kind of, it's about who's going to put up the first space hotel or who's going to mine the first space asteroid to get, there's not that human element to it where it's, we're torturing all of these people to better humanity. Instead, it's like we're making workers urinate into bottles so that I can be the first billionaire to float in space for 20 minutes. It just kind of, it loses its romantic power.
It does.
That human optimism, even though it's quite a dark period in history, with nuclear war being at the brink. We had the Cuban Missile disaster, crisis, and a few other sort of scenarios that could have ended the world. But there's still kind of this idea that science and technology is going to save us. It's going to make humanity, the titans of the solar system.
Definitely.
So that's what I liked about the science fiction part of this film.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a cool take. I hadn't looked at it. I hadn't thought of it in that correlation, but you're exactly right. Yeah, I mean now it is all about more. It's just about the money. I think that's the difference from my point of view. Whereas that, you're exactly right. That was more about even in this film, it's America versus Russia, and then because Strickland is the American, he's the bad guy. To make him more the bad guy, the Russian scientist wants to save the amphibian man, right? Whereas, so it makes Strickland more of a bad guy, like it really does, doesn't it? Even the Russians wanted to save him, and then when they couldn't save him, the doctor's boss, the other, I don't know their names, but then they well, we just don't want them to have the research, so kill the amphibian man, But it made the doctor Hofstadler, it made him more of a good guy, didn't it? Because he didn't do that. He helped out.
Yeah, he murdered some poor guard doing his job.
Yeah, that bit's glossed over.
It's always a little bit rough on guards in movies. Guards
Yeah.
are often, they're the extension arm of the bad guys. But really, that guy was just doing his job. He's meant to be checking IDs.
And he seemed to do a good job.
It's a bit dodgy. And so he's going, well, hold on, what's going on here? You're pulling a scam.
That's right. And I mean, it was glossed over. He gets the stab of the needle, and then there's no more reference of him. he's just lost.
Well, that's the Austin Powers joke.
It is. I was just thinking the same thing. Yeah.
Where the henchman family is sitting there wondering when henchman daddy was going to come home to his henchman children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the bachelor party. Just hold on a second.
Let's move on to talk about the Old Chestnut, the film festival, because we're progressing with that one there.
Yep.
I think it's safe to say that we have secured some funding for that, which is nice because we have invoiced for that.
We have.
now.
So we've gotten
So
some
that means that
funding from the local council, which is great, the City of Mandurah.
go Mandurah.
Go Mandurah, they're supporting it.
And that also means then that this film festival is going to be really quite excellent, I think.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Workshops, there's going to be, podcasting brilliance, there's going to be an after party, there's going to be an awards and screening. It's going to all happen here in May 21. Keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, it's going to be all official. We're going to have awards. We're going to have a red carpet ceremony. We're going to be picking... Films are coming in, aren't they? We're still getting people submitting, which is great. We've got a whole bunch of films that you and I need to sit down and I don't know, we're going to have to also figure out, because I'm excited just to sit down and watch all those films. I think we're going to need, even maybe after the film festival, to do a special on all of those films or something. I don't know. We're going to have to come up with something from it, because, even if they won't all be able to be selected, but I just have a gut feeling that a lot of them are going to be great little films and they're going to be worthy of talking about. And so I just think that even after the festival, we should be probably talking to some of those filmmakers and having chats. So if you're a regular to the podcast, get excited, because at some point we're going to have some super special Space Brains where we talk about all those little films, I think.
If we're going sort of a bit video after this, we might even have some video input, some little, what do you call it, like a supercut of montage of all the amazing stuff.
Definitely.
Because it's going to be a lot to talk about, and it'd be good to be able to show people some of the talent and brilliance that people are submitting.
Yeah, no, I think that we'll have to come up with some different ways of showing. So the podcasts, maybe some little videos, maybe some live streaming online or something, I don't know, whilst we watch them. I don't know. So if you're out there and you're listening and you're interested in any of those options, maybe send us an email or a message and let us know what you think. Should we be streaming them or putting them online and having a talk with the filmmakers and finding out more about them? And yeah, just let us know where we should go with it. So that means we should get into the plot of The Shape of Water. So this film, as we talked about before, Del Toro and Vanessa Taylor wrote it, and Del Toro was the director behind this. Sally Hawkins plays the key main protagonist, Elisa Esposito, and Michael Shannon plays that Richard Strickland, who we've mentioned a lot about. Richard Jenkins, this name you might not ring a bell, but he's been in truckloads of films over time. He plays the neighbour, Giles. Octavia Spencer, she's been a superstar over these last 3 or 4 years in a whole bunch of different films. She plays Zelda, the other cleaner woman that sort of reluctantly doesn't help her, and then she does help her. Michael Stuhlbarg plays that Dr. Robert Hofston, the double agent, whatever you want to call him. And Doug Jones, good old Dougie, plays Amphibian Man. This was filmed in the US and Mexico. I mentioned before that Del Toro pitched this idea a little bit, didn't really take off. A couple of years later, he was pitching this idea again for a amphibian man that falls in love with a janitor. And he ended up on Fox Searchlights, who are notorious for funding, they're sort of an independent arm. I mean, the budget is still a lot bigger than a lot of independent films, but they're an independent arm of Fox Studios, but they do specialise a lot more in these sorts of films. Go check them out. There is a whole bunch of great films that they have funded over the years. The budgets do tend to be under 20 mil, and a little tidbit for this was Del Toro was considering having this whole film in black and white, and Fox said back to him, okay, if you do it in black and white, we'll give you 17 million. If you do it in colour, we'll give you 20 million. So he kind of leaned more into getting a little bit more money to make the film go a little bit further. And so he went that way. And I think he went the right option. Again, they weren't expecting it to do very well, but it really blew the socks off worldwide. I think it was around 60 mil in the US and eventually made 195 million worldwide. So that is a massive profit uptake. You don't get that on many films, do you, Surrey?
No, and it's still one of these funny things. In terms of scale, there are more recent movies that have had budgets bigger than its gross worldwide take. It's a bit unfortunate, I think, that we sort of seem to value good cinema less. I guess it's just a numbers game, isn't it? If you can pull in all the 14-year-olds on school holidays, and because all the parents go, just go to the bloody cinema, get out of my house. You're gonna blow it up, and so you have a sci-fi romance fantasy like this, and you're not going to get anywhere near that number of people in there.
No,
but still, 10 times your budget, you've got to be happy.
Everyone, I think everyone would be happy with that result. That funds a lot more films going into the future. And so, interesting enough, that's your kind of public response. So, a really good response that way from people, bums on seats. But it also got massive creative and critical positive response, including winning 4 Oscars. It was Del Toro's 4th time to be nominated, and he won for this film, and this film in particular won. So he won the best directing, it won the best motion picture for the year, best achievement in music as well, written for a motion picture, the original score, and also best achievement in production design. So I mean, I think those last couple of things it'd be a bit of a no-brainer to not give it to this film, because the eclectic version of this world that they created, the way that research lab was, think about the colouring, think about the costumes, think about how the monster was chained up. He was also put in front of that screen. Think about the little car they drove around the research laboratory. Think about the bus. I don't know if you even noticed, when she first hops on the bus, there's a guy with a birthday cake and balloons. I mean, that is the production design. That's the production designer's job, is to build that world.
And there's a slice missing from the birthday cake.
Yeah, and her apartment and the things that were in her apartment, there was so many, and I'll come to it in a minute, there's so many water motifs, obvious and non-obvious. And so, to me, the production design, this is brilliant production design. Like this was part of, like, when I first watched it, I just went, wow, like this is the way film, it's not just a film, it's a painting, like everything is being painted, so it's brilliant. I think it does lend itself when you do set a film, in the past, like in the 60s or the 50s, or even if you said now, the 90s, it does give production design a very clear look, but I think here they nailed it.
They could easily just take literally a photo or a home video and see what people had in their homes.
Yes.
Because one of the problems you get with production design, I think, and sets is you say, okay, this is going to be in someone's apartment. So you just kind of, here's the couch and here's the coffee table, and people sit there, and you try to put a couple bits and pieces around, but sometimes it's a bit sparse. It looks like a set.
Yeah.
And that's because when you have a look at, even just the room I'm sitting in at the moment, I've got a couple of just sort of really odd things. I've got like an empty can of drink that I was drinking earlier this evening, and I've got like a little ball of string that I play with, and there's just kind of seemingly random elements which you'd never in a million years would you think to put that into a set. You go, okay, this is a guy's office. So there's his computer. He does podcasting, so here's a microphone. But then they're probably going to miss out on the multiple sets of headphones I've got, and the phantom power units I've got, and the fact that I don't use a normal amp system. I use this Line 6 sound source.
Yeah, well, see, that
tower.
That would tell
all of that sort of thing.
That would tell the story that you're serious about your podcasting. If you had, that's the thing. That a production designer can decide, right? Should Surrey have 8 pairs of headphones? So he collects headphones because he's so into listening, trying to figure out which headphones are the best sound, or does he have one that it's like, that's his favorite one, and it's kind of been gaffer taped, and it's put stickers on it, and and it's been through traveling airports, and it's kind of broken an ear off, but he's repaired it, but he just has to keep using that awesome set of headphones that relates to his childhood somehow, you know? So there's always a story that could be told there. And that's the job of the production designer, you know, to fill in those gaps.
And I think that is, as you said, what puts this movie in the Oscar category for that is everything. Like in Giles' apartment, there's all those bits and pieces. It looked just like his character. You expect him to be sitting there.
Yeah,
like
definitely.
a probably once successful and, you know, very active artist, because you see all of those bits and pieces. There's boxes of things, and there's paintings about the place, but then he's left there kind of with just his easel and the same picture that he's working on constantly.
Yeah, definitely. So anyway, kudos to the film. It also won a whole bunch of other really esteemed awards around the world, not just Oscars, but I guess when we talk about film, Oscars tends to be there, including BAFTA, won a couple of BAFTAs as well, but in a whole bunch of other film festivals and things like this. So massive success critically and also bums on seats. So yeah, kudos to everyone involved in making the film, and they got rewarded. So we want to break down into some of the key bits of narrative that we like to do, and these come from all good story and script writing teachers. Been around for hundreds of years, some of these, and some the last 20 years. We're talking about people like Campbell, Schneider, McKee and Field, just to name a few. But there's also things like The Hero's Journey, if you've ever read that. And all of this leads into the 3-act structure overall, which then can be broken down into what we call specific moments or beats.
So let's have a look at the style of this film, because it has a very distinct visual effect.
Yeah, so I wanted to pick on some of that just to describe it. It's a painting, this film, so let's paint a picture, so to speak. Be expected, you know, to be delighted for your eyeballs watching this film. The colour is saturated. There's which means there's extremities of those particular colour schemes are pushed out, and it's very vibrant in its colour. Reminded me of a film called Amelie, if you're a filmmaker, a German sort of film. Interesting enough, online, I did not know this, but yeah, the filmmaker of that actually claimed Del Toro kind of copied him a bit too much, but I'll leave that to each and everyone's own opinion. But yeah, we basically got this real Fuji film saturated colour. Even though the film is the 1960s and they play off that, so the costumes, the cars, we said the Cadillac, you know, it's a 60s Cadillac, and that also revolves into moments of the story as well. There's this thing that we said before as well, where the themes of the film are explored with juxtaposition to famous moments in time. So in American history, being that we are set in America, so although it's fictional, there is these kind of famous songs juxtapositioned with some famous nasty news moments. So, and I found that really interesting that Giles, you know, before we were talking about living for the future, Giles, the neighbour, he says once or twice, I don't want to know about that, and I don't want to interfere with that. And what's actually happening is on the news, there's the footage of the riots. Or there's the in the pie shop, there's the man that kind of goes off at the African American, and he doesn't want to get involved. You know, he wants to stay on the outside of that, and so there's that juxtaposition going on. Everything is water, right? So the colouring, the objects, the signs literally in the film have some sort of connection to it. So we have mentioned some of these things, but you know, she's into the bath, the water in the bath. She has a duck shoe brush. She polishes shoes, but it's a duck. You know, like ducks are around water. The colour of the car, the uniform colour as well, a teal. It rains a lot. You know, there's all the rains. Even in the women's bathroom. Now, it connects to the setting here. This is really good production design. There's a propaganda poster that says, "Loose lips sink ships," right? Because they're in a research facility, meaning don't talk about the research, but it's ships, it's water, you know. The pie itself, the pecan pie is the greeny kind of colour.
Key lime pie.
Key lime pie. That's not pecan. What did I say? Pecan. Yeah, key lime makes so much more. That pecan would be brown. you know, and there's the canal, and when she's on the bus, it's raining, and, you know, like they're surrounded by water. Robert McKee, the writing teacher, talks a lot about the French film Diabolique, which is kind of a murder film. And in that, the water theme is throughout. I think this film probably stands up with that. Like, there is so much water motifs. See if you can spot some others and let me know. And then, like we talked about before, Surrey, there's the future motive. So there's the signs of the future. There's the speaking of the future. The characters are kind of, are they living in the future versus living in the past? There's the signs on the side of the road. There's the military plans. There's so much that's kind of like the future is coming, isn't there? It's all there. The underhanded discrimination, racism, sexism, homophobia, it's all sort of there, which is like what happened versus then also outright versions of these. You know, we see the Colonel, he kind of, at one moment, he sexually harasses the main character, doesn't he? And
he's gross.
He's really gross with that, you know, like he's already been gross. We've seen him be gross, and it kind of distracts him from the fact that she is the one that's stolen the amphibian man. But he's like, you know, he's interested in her because she can't talk, and he says, I can bet you I can make you squawk, you know, and it's like, oh, it's really, really gross. And the world is quite quirky, you know, like we said, there's a guy on the bus with a half-eaten cake and balloons, but it's there. You know, the cinema itself is very quirky. That guy, it's like when you mentioned the scene where they've flooded the bathroom, we come down, don't we? An aerial shot onto a guy that's asleep with a bag of popcorn, and the water goes in his mouth, and he like hops up and like hops out of the cinema. Like, it's great. It's a very quirky world, but yet it feels like reality. It's weird, that to me is sort of the definition of a painting. There's also a lot of cinematic movement, meaning that the camera's moving a lot. So we're not static camera work. We're kind of slowly creeping in on people. We're rolling, we're dollying around the place. There's a lot of movement in this film. It's actually pretty intense, actually, the amount of movement, but not point of view, not shaky. It's all very, very smooth. And the editing itself, I think I picked this more up on this second viewing, but scenes really do end on cuts on action, which is very normal, but there's sound cutting going on. So we've kind of got sound rolling from one scene to the next. And that almost happens, I think, every scene. Like, I really noticed it in this second viewing. So if you're out there and you're watching at home, is there some scenes where it doesn't cut on the sound? So, like, for example, you know, someone might open a box and then in the next scene there's like a box closing, or a trolley is rolling in one scene, so you got the sound of like the wheels, and then that gets cut with that sound, and the wheels are now like a car sound or something. So it's like the sound just keeps continuing. Or, you know, a door opens and slams shut, and in the next scene the character is like slamming a door shut to start the scene.
The opening image, we see a camera panning or moving through water. First of all, it looks like we're at the bottom of a lake or something, but then we see strange lights, and we go in it. My little notes sort of say that it's a flooded street, and there's, oh no, flooded building, and there's sort of this mysterious, playful music. So it looks like it could have been a spooky scene, but the music was peaceful. It was playful. And then we had this nice little voiceover, which we find out is Giles, but he is sort of almost telling a fairy tale. This gave me the feeling of like a Tim Burton film, like Edward Scissorhands, but without the Tim Burton goth aesthetic, you know. And there was a line in the voiceover that I picked up on, I quite liked, which is the story of the princess without a voice and the monster who tried to destroy it all. Which I suppose you could naively think that maybe they're talking about the merman being the monster, but we all know it's not going to be the merman, it's going to be a human, because whenever you have a monster film, it's always humans who are the real monsters.
So this leads anyway into the catalyst, which to me in this film is, you know, Elisa, curious about the creature, kind of goes into the lab by herself, and, you know, there's that upright bit of the tank, and she sort of walks up to it, and he comes towards her. So they have that first interaction. To me, that would be the catalyst.
I found it interesting, this film, when we're talking about these beats, because it's almost in some ways that there are three stories with their own slightly different beats in this. And certainly I think, when the creature tank is wheeled in and Eliza sort of sees it and gets curious, that's kind of the start of her catalyst.
Yeah.
As you said. But then when the Strickland gets his fingers bitten off and comes running out, that's almost like his catalyst to change, because now he's been one-upped by this creature, and he's got to try to overcome the creature. Like, that's his antagonist to his protagonist of his story.
Yes.
And I saw this a few other times in Act 2 and Act 3, where the midpoint and the bad guys move in happen to a couple of the characters. So it's not just Eliza and the fish boy. It's actually also Dimitri and Strickland both have their own midpoints, and bad guys move in, and Dark Night of the Soul.
Yeah.
And I found that a very interesting way of doing this. And I think that does play into that fairy tale, mode of storytelling here, where you have the three little pigs each build a house, or you have the three bears, or the three billy goats gruff. There's three is one of these magical numbers in any given fairy tale, and you'll often find that someone will try to do something three times, or they've got to complete, they get granted three wishes, or whatever it is. And in this story, we have these 3 points of view around the story, I think.
Yeah, well, I almost see, it's interesting you're saying that, because I almost could find, especially in this second viewing, that the way that we do break down the beats, you could almost argue it's Strickland who goes on this journey. So he doesn't, at the end of it, he doesn't win. Like, he loses, he dies. But it's almost like the bad guy's closing in. Or the midpoint of this film for him is almost like the amphibian man is taken away, his car is destroyed. He's kind of really, and then he's given 32 hours or something to fix, otherwise he's going to lose his job. Like, it's almost like he's not he is the bad guy, but it's almost like he's not the bad guy. Like, it's almost like he's the protagonist of his story. Whereas actually for Esposito, she's at that, especially in the midpoint onwards, it's almost like, well, it's not so much the bad guy's closing in. She sort of more has a clear goal, and she has to look after him. And so it kind of did take me a little bit to decipher those beats. I ended up more going, no, I can see the beats for her. But I agree with you that there's more going on, that these beats almost roll to every single character. But maybe this film is showing us that that's what you need to have a bit more, is you need to have the beats for all the characters.
Yeah, and because Dimitri, of course, he has that moment where he sees that Eliza is having a communication with this creature. It's not just an idiot.
Yeah.
Not like it's a monster that happens to look, like, it's not like, a monkey that looks sort of humanoid, but it's kind of a bit of an animal, really. That's sort of his catalyst. And he has a midpoint there where he's then told to kill it. So it's all looking good. Yes, okay. They want to do the research. We should take it. And then the midpoint is, no, it's too hard. You're going to have to kill it. Like, that's suddenly his, research and his infiltration of the space has suddenly turned sour.
Yes.
Yeah. So
anyway, so what's some of the things in the debate? So for me, I agree. So there's sort of like almost multiple narrative arcs going on here, quite deep for all those key characters. Some of the debate things I was seeing is that for Eliza, it's, well, no, this amphibian man is very dangerous. So for her, it's like, if you continue to see this creature, don't trust it. And with that, we have the Strickland loses his fingers. So it really ups the ante that, this thing in there is not just a play toy. She's gone in there previously and kind of signaled with it, but this thing has the ability to rip your fingers off. So to me, that was kind of part of the debate there, is like, is this creature actually safe, or is it like a vicious creature? So then she starts beginning to visit him more and push in that, and we have that nice little moment of feeding the eggs. At the same time, the doctor, at this point in time, he kind of wants to experiment. And then really, really rapidly, Strickland wants to then, after kind of getting his fingers back on and stuff, he wants to dissect him straight away. You know, he wants to get rid of him. But as we know, with him, it's also about getting out of this lab and getting out of this town, because he doesn't want to be in the present, does he? Which is going back to that theme.
Yeah, his greatness is in the future somewhere.
Yeah. So breaking the two, the sort of fork to me is that she does feed him, and they do the sign language more proactively, and they have that bond. So to me, that kind of like, once she got past the fact that thinking, okay, no, she's going to persevere with this, and she feeds him the eggs and gives the sign language, and he kind of comes back, and so that actually drives it in. So into Act 2. Now the thing separate to that, the B story to me is more the neighbour, so like Giles. So he loves the guy at the pie shop, you know, and so we start taking this journey that Giles is an artist, but he's probably a gay man, and he's in love with the guy at the pie shop. So that's kind of and we have that scene, he's bought pie for her and him. Sorry.
It's not very good.
Yeah, and it's not very good.
No.
And he's got 18...
We'll have it later, and he puts it in the fridge with all the other key lime pie that clearly he still doesn't like.
That's right. He's got a whole bunch of pie that he doesn't actually like.
No, and I think that is also a bit of it's one of those allusions to his life.
Yeah.
Is that he keeps taking a bite of these things that are supposed to be good, but they're not good for him.
Yeah, that's right. So it's a good setup of his, like a B story, a separate story, yeah.
The fun and games is quite interesting in this one as well, I think, because, again, we sort of get multiple views of this fun and games.
Yeah.
The escaping the facility is very quick. You know, it would have been easy to have had that as be, third act is enacting the escape plan. But see, that the escape plan isn't the point of this film. So instead we start seeing like the cooking lots of eggs, you know, and playing music, sharing her favourite music, and then, you know, dancing for the fishy. And then we see Dimitri, of course. We discover that he is a spy.
Yeah.
And that he's sympathetic to the creature, and he's like trying to maneuver around the other Americans there. And of course, Moscow rejects Dimitri.
Yeah, and at the same time, we have then this General Hoyt rocks up and saying, well, you know, I'm happy to listen to all the ideas, but at the end of the day, it's my decision, you know. And so, you know, you can pitch to me the science value, but at the end of the day, you know, we need to get the man on the moon and stuff the Soviets, sort of thing, so to speak.
Yes, and, you know, fishmen will do that apparently.
Apparently so.
So I think midpoint is kind of the escape of the facility. That's where the security guys, you know, Strickland's life takes a turn. It's where Dimitri has to commit, and likewise his life becomes more dangerous. And it's where we leave the facility. It seems good for Eliza. Like, you could say that's kind of a good thing because it enhances or expands their relationship. But we do also then start getting the downside of the fact that you've got an amphibian in your bathtub.
Yeah, well, I think it's like what we said before. It's a good example of a bit of a false victory, because they've saved him from the military for the meanwhile, but then the military are going to try to hunt him down and find him. Strickland's going to try to find him. So they're still on their tail, but they have got him out of the facility, meaning that now she can have more intimate moment with him. But they're still also got to get him back to the ocean or the river, right? So it's like, yeah, it's actually probably a really good example of like a false victory. So it's a victory, but not quite, you know, you haven't won the championship, so to speak.
Yeah, and we see maybe it's a little bit more fun and games, which I found a bit strange here, where the old fish boy eats the cat and runs away. And yeah, that didn't go the way maybe you would expect it to go at this point after the midpoint, which would be where that becomes a difficulty. Now he's lost in the city, and something's going to happen. Bad guys are closing in and people are going to find him, and he's running out of oxygen or whatever it is he needs. Yeah. That weird stuff. But instead, they sort of get him back, and it's almost like a bit of just a little reminder to sort of say he doesn't belong here. I think that's the bad guy moves in part of that is he's out of his element. He doesn't belong in a city. He'll eat cats. He'll get confused and frightened, and he's got claws, for goodness sakes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's the old Encino Man thing, isn't it? Which is more fun and games, it's the bringing something weird into the environment and stuff. But yeah, this is definitely after the midpoint, and the interesting thing there is he has a moment with Giles, because when he did eat the cat and run away, he scratched him, and when he has this moment with Giles, they kind of touch each other's heads. And he actually glows. We haven't seen him glow before, but he has these kind of sparkly, diamond glow all over him. And Giles kind of jokes it off. He goes, oh, it's probably not very sanitary. But then the next day, he wakes up, and, I mean, it's not completely obvious, but he's actually got a bit more hair, and his arm is healed. So it's as though the creature has actually kind of like got some sort of healing power.
Well, they revered him as a god, as it says. Yeah, we get a couple of time clocks as well introduced. Yep. 48 hours for Dimitri's extraction, 36 hours for Strickland.
Yep.
And then we have the, I can't remember what the date was, the 10th.
Yep. 10th of something. 10th of something.
December?
Something like that, when the rains will come.
But yeah, so everyone has this time clock now, and we also sort of see that he's losing some of his scales. He's clearly suffering from not having an appropriate environment.
Yeah, but with that, Elisa, which you detailed before, floods the bathroom, and they have their very intimate relationship moment, don't they? And they basically already do it once, and then she does it again with flooding the bathroom. And that flooding the bathroom scene is fantastic, as you were talking about before. It's extremely romantic, even though it's, bestiality, so to speak, but they kind of break the barriers down by the fact she floods the bathroom. And I love that idea. As I said before, the water trickles down into the cinema below, the empty cinema bar, a couple of people, and, the landlord gets pissed off. And when Giles runs in, he kind of opens the door and the whole apartment's flooded, but then he just closes it on him because he realises that they're having an intimate moment, So I thought that was a really beautiful scene. That they stripped away the bathroom and it became them dancing, dancing in the water, didn't it?
And interesting also in that those sorts of scenes were still happening while we then had the, this death and inspiration turn towards the end of Act 2, which is, I think, is where the fishman is definitely dying. Like, he's bleeding out his mouth a bit. He's not happy. And then we have security guy Strickland. His fingers have gone black and they stink.
Yes.
And then Dimitri is shot by Strickland.
Yeah.
And did you see he got shot through the mouth? And Guillermo's not afraid of a bit of gore here. And Strickland hooks him like a fish in the mouth and drags him out through out from under where he is into the rain.
Yeah, again, it's raining.
Yeah, where he gives up the cleaners. But of course, they assume there must have been an elite strike squad of at least 10 men. And yeah, Dimitri has a bit of a chuckle and goes, no, they don't have names or ranks. They just clean up.
Yeah.
And that brings, of course, that's Strickland's sudden inspiration is like, his fingers, he lost his fingers. And I think he ends up, when he goes and confronts Zelda, he actually rips his fingers off.
Yeah, he rips them off.
Chucks them on the floor, and we see them bounce, and one of them goes under the television. It's quite graphic. But yeah, that's sort of he's gathering his forces. His fingers are gone now. He doesn't have to worry about them because he's choosing Act 3. And in turn, of course, Zelda having Strickland break into her home and like threaten her like that, and her husband being a little bit useless. And yeah, fair enough. I mean, Strickland's a scary guy, but
yeah, well, I think
that was sort of her turning point for like, okay, now I've got to move on to Act 3. So it's
and that was one of those nice moments that the husband's useless, which Zelda had sort of joked about before, but it's also the black man versus the white man, right? Like there's a bit of, I think we can't stand up to the military white man either, you know, and
no, there's nothing that he could have done, because had he punched the guy out, like that's it, he would have been, you know, taken out.
Yeah, so there's sort of, it's very underhanded, you know, like but anyway, it's great. And I think it's also, to me, that's what we were talking about before, that if you take Strickland's narrative arc, it's very clear, like he's been given a time clock. If he doesn't sort out this mess, he's gone. He's going to lose his career. He's losing his fingers to the point where he rips them off. And then he's also tried to solve the crime and got the wrong people, so to speak, you know. And so it to me, it was really heading like Strickland. This is Strickland's 3-act structure almost, you know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Eliza is also, you know, dealing with loving this amphibian creature, falling in love with him, giving him everything, rescuing him, taking him back to her place, you know, the further consummating the relationship. But then he's dying, knowing that we have to get him to the river, whilst the bad guys kind of do close in on her, you know. And in this case, Zelda says Strickland's coming, so they take off. And this really gets us into, you know, pushing into the 3rd act. And she takes him down to the canals with Giles, and
she tries to say goodbye to him. Like this is, you know, we had the first action reversal, and part of that is she's trying to say goodbye, and Strickland turns up and shoots everyone. Knocks Giles aside and shoots Fishman, and I wish he had a name other than just Fishy. I just keep referring to him as Fishy or Fish Boy or Fish Face in my notes. Yeah. And shoots Eliza. And, you know, so this is a bit of a reversal here where you go, oh, my goodness. Except what we discover also, as we said, is this is actually Strickland's first action. So he's going to get a reversal.
Yes.
Where, you know, he thinks he's won. And then, of course, the Fishman is like a god. Does Strickland mention that here? Like... Yeah, he does, because the fish guy, like he glows and he just stands up and wipes the wounds away. Yeah, he's sitting there trying to reload.
Yeah, he heals himself instantly, basically.
Yeah, and Strickland's trying to reload quickly, and I think this fish guy stands in front of him and he says, "Oh, well, maybe you are a god." As it's like Strickland has recognized defeat, that Strickland does not have the power.
Yeah.
It does not, because the Fishman has the, you know, love of a woman. The Fishman has the confidence and poise. It just is. Whereas Strickland is not. He doesn't have this proper respect. He doesn't have himself present. He has his things. He's got a gun. He's got his prod. He's got his car. He's got his family even. And none of those things demonstrate any sort of power. But Fish guy just sort of wipes off a couple of bullets, walks up to Strickland, and Strickland goes, "Yeah, okay.
Maybe you are a god."
Yeah.
And with that, he just rips his face off, doesn't he, basically?
It's none too good. I think Giles whacks Strickland in the back of the head. And, they wander off and jump in the water.
No, the Fishman just rips his head off, basically, like slashes his throat kind of thing.
Oh, yes. There we go. And I got the quote here. Strickland says, "Fuck, you are a god."
Ah, there you go.
Just before he gets slaughtered.
Slaughtered, yeah. No, he's slaughtered. It puts an end to him. That's the other thing, you know, like he kind of has to die, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's...
Because otherwise
in a way, he was already dead. He was a walking dead character. Like.
Yeah. And also because then as a story, he might keep hunting them after this, you know, whereas others would probably just let it go.
Yeah, his entire self-worth would be tied up.
Yeah. So they jump into the water, the Fishman and Elisa, just as all the authorities rock up. So Giles is kind of okay. And this is, to me, a nice little twist on the whole story, is that when they're in the water, you sort of think, oh, he's probably just going to go up and kiss her and she'll start breathing. But he goes up and he actually opens up the wounds on her neck, and it's those wounds on her neck from when she had her voice box cut out as a kid, and the reason why she can't speak, and then he turns them into gills.
Yeah.
And
I picked that, of course, at the very first in Act 1. I've got a little note there saying, "Oh, Eliza has or had gills."
Yeah.
Because
they look like it.
Set up for it, but it's nice to see it happen.
And so then we have this bookend of Giles repeating. You sort of said at the start the start of a fairy tale, and he says, "Oh well, I'd like to say they happily lived after, but maybe instead of that, we should say they remained in love." So he kind of puts it in a bit of a different, maybe adult version of a fairy tale.
The bookend of the opening is that the two of them are in each other's arms, whereas in the start, Eliza just lying, sleeping by herself.
Yeah, and instead of being in an apartment, that's flooded, so to speak, in maybe dream world, she is now in the water.
In a canal.
Yeah. Okay, and that brings us to the end of the plot. So we like to put these films on a ladder, not so much maybe a ladder of watching it, not a ladder of importance or, one is better than the other, but just as in a viewing ladder. So for me, The Shape of Water, I'm actually sort of putting it higher up the rungs of my ladder. For example, I have Oblivion as my top rung, followed by The Lobster, and then I think you should have a look at The Shape of Water, and then that would be followed by Snowpiercer. I think that would be a nice little trilogy. Lobster's quite quirky, weird, futuristic. This, if you then went from that and then you went into Shape of Water, you'd sort of be going back in time, as we talked about, a lot of these undercurrent themes of a moment in sort of society, and also creature kind of sci-fi, those old scientists that we talked about earlier. And then if you jump into something like Snowpiercer, where it's like dystopian future, I think that would be a very interesting little trilogy of sci-fi. How about yourself, Surrey?
Yeah, I liked this film very much, and I think it's got a very strong sort of theme and feeling to it. And I wanted to put that against another film. So down the bottom of at number 57, I've got Edge of Tomorrow. That's the bookend. I've got Oblivion at at one end and Edge of Tomorrow at the other, and then Space Between Us, which is about the boy born on Mars, and then The Shape of Water. So you get quite a different take on the love stories, two of them one after the other, so that you can. I like to have these contrasts in these. So it's the same theme of romance and separation, not being able to connect. But
definitely. Sounds
very
good.
Sort of different approaches to that.
Sounds fantastic. So what did you think about our suggestions on the ladder versus your own ladder? Are you following along at home? If so, share your ladders. Right, are we wrong? Would you order this up higher? Would you order it down lower? Would you compose it against one of our other films? Go for it. Let us know what you think about it. Okay, so let's get into a bit of science behind this film. What kind of science do you want to dissect, Surrey, from The Shape of Water?
I'll tell you what's really interesting about the time period. So The Shape of Water, I think, is nominally 1962.
Yeah, I think there's reference to 62, isn't there, at some point?
Yeah, so having a bit of a think about this, and they kept talking about, the space program and so on. And it got me thinking about C-Lab and the history behind that. And we had this fellow, George Foot Bond, also known as Papa Topside. It sounds a little bit,
yeah,
woohoo. But really, it's because he was a diver.
Right.
So he was in the Navy in 1953, diving as submarine medical officer. And he moved to the Naval Medical Research Laboratory, and he was conducting experiments in saturation diving. And saturation diving is the sort of diving that you do when you go down deep sea. Normally when you do a bit of scuba, you're sort of in the top 10, 20 meters of water sort of thing. Saturation diving is more when you're going down 100 meters or further.
Right.
So at the bottom of oil rigs, or you're doing marine recovery missions where a submarine has crashed and you need to get down there. you need to repair something, whatever. And so it takes a certain amount of time for a diver to swim down and swim back up.
Yep.
And of course, as you go down, you get pressurized and you start having nitrogen dissolve into your blood. And then when you come back up, they will form bubbles and kill you. They're called the bends. So there are limits to ordinary scuba diving. So saturation diving is where you stick someone in pressure, you give them a mixture of gases to breathe, and you pressurize them so that they become saturated with the inert gases like nitrogen, helium, whatever it is, in their blood, in their soft tissues, and they're breathing pressurized gas at the same sort of pressure of the water that you're going to stick them in. And that way they stay down underwater, like in a habitat for a diving bell type thing or a hyperbaric chambery type thing, where they can go out, do their work, come back in, eat, sleep, and repeat for several days, which means that you can actually get some real work done deep under the water. But of course, that was not a thing up until this guy, Mr. Bond, George Bond. So in the early 60s, he instigated this thing called Project Genesis, which, don't you love these old names of the projects?
I do.
He chooses things. So that started in 1957, where he was looking at, how do human bodies, how do bodies respond to breathing different gases at different pressures? Because the question you have to ask is, if you at sea level, roughly speaking, normal atmospheric pressure, we breathe about, let's call it 20% oxygen, and most of the rest of it is sort of nitrogen. And there's some other bits and pieces in there, but it's not important. So how would we respond though if we put that pressurized, if we had to breathe that under pressure, or if we had to breathe different gases? So he started off with a bunch of rats, which just the normal lab rats, and he put them down to the equivalent depth of about 200 feet below sea level, which is, I don't know, it's about 100 meters.
Yeah.
No, more like about 80 meters or so. And held them down there for, say, 35 hours, 14 days, 16 days, that sort of time period. They found that after 35 hours at 200 feet, just breathing normal air, all the rats died due to oxygen toxicity, which is, it comes from breathing too much pure oxygen. It's quite damaging, it turns out. But they discovered that you can't just breathe normal air down there. So then they stuck some with more oxygen, and it turns out, they died even faster. Isn't that cool? So then they tried a few mixes of 3% oxygen and with 97% hydrogen, 20% oxygen and some helium, 3% oxygen and helium, and so forth at different depths and so on. But they found that oxygen and helium was quite good. Seemed to work the best down to the deepest for the longest.
Right.
So finally they ended up with some goats and squirrel monkeys as well. They all survived, so they were fine.
Oh, thank God.
Yes, thank goodness me. You see, they were going to scrap this process. They're going to say, well, it's not too interesting. But in 1962, trying to get people into space, to the moon, they've got this seaman this fishman who breathes water and air, and that's significant because water has much less oxygen in it than does air, and so the requirements of your lungs compared to gills are very different. But in 1962, there's a lot of interest in the helium-oxygen atmospheres for manned space flights.
Yeah, right.
And so George said, oh, you know what? I know how we can test the effects of this. We can stick a bunch of people underwater and give them helium-oxygen. And so they did phase C of Operation Genesis, which is where they got 3 subjects at 1 atmosphere, that's normal atmospheric pressure, because they didn't want to accidentally kill these guys. So they chucked them in some oxygen and mostly helium for 6 days.
Right.
And they found there was some difficulty. So one of the problems is that the density of helium is different. So that means you lose heat, body heat, a lot faster, and you also have trouble understanding their talk. You can well imagine what it sounds like when you got a bunch of people for 6 days breathing huge amounts of helium. They were all talking like chipmunks, and it made life a bit difficult. But what all this meant was they finally go ahead to do this C-Lab, and C-Lab is a fabulous series of underwater experimental habitats, which look like glorified, I don't know, tubes with the ends covered off. They weren't very imaginative in their designs here. That's just really just a cylinder with the ends capped. And they stuck them down. So that was 1964. They finally lowered C-Lab. They dropped it about 60 meters below the water.
Uh-huh.
And they conducted a whole bunch of experiments. They had to bring it up, though, because there was going to be a storm. They brought it up, and you can still go see C-Lab. It's sitting in the Museum of Man in the Sea in Panama City.
Right.
It's been restored for viewing. There was a C-Lab 2, which went down in 1965. They went down to 62 meters, and they had some improvements. So they put in a heater, because, who knew they'd need a heater? But they had to keep the ambient temperature about 30 degrees centigrade because they got so cold in the helium.
Right.
They also then had some showers and a bottlenose dolphin called Tuffy, they were sort of training as part of their, try and get dolphins to help the Navy.
Put lasers on the dolphins idea.
Yeah, it was mainly they're looking at, using them to transport materials to submarines and deep sea dives, because dolphins can transition from, they can go down to 62 meters without much trouble. They've got different physiology to us. At C-Lab 3 got a bit of trouble because of the Vietnam War. They did manage to get it down, but there was all sorts of problems, and it cost too much money, and it went on and on. But some of the things they discovered. So what did they discover about people? Because they obviously discovered new life and new creatures. They were able to, see what the sediment floor was like and so on. But one of the main things they're looking to do is find out how all this affected people. And so, one of the things, of course, is people got rashes a lot because they were constantly in and out of wetsuits. They were, wet. Their skin was being rubbed. The chamber tended to be a bit humid and warm when you're under there. You also then have some problems, much like air travel. Your taste and your hunger alters. Your sense of taste diminishes. And it seems that the only thing that these aquanauts could do, much like the astronauts, is just put hot sauce on everything because they just couldn't taste things properly. They also had to eat a lot because they were burning a lot of energy just to keep warm, but then they were also going swimming a lot.
Yeah.
All the experimentation required them to go out swimming, which is just really difficult. And so they ate double what you'd normally otherwise eat.
And they didn't want to.
It's difficult because if you're underwater for 2 weeks or 30 days, there's only so many foods that you can have down there, and they couldn't cook anything because they didn't want to have a fire. And in fact, it was difficult to have a fire in or anything too hot down there because of the atmosphere. It was all wrong. So they tended to get these chemical heaters and stuff. The meals ready to eat. There's military ration packs, and it's basically not very nice. Another one, though, was sleeping. Everyone slept really well because, first of all, they were exhausted, and secondly, they were deep underwater, so they didn't have a lot of noises. They sort of had the occasional creaks and little hisses of the air vents and so forth, but they said that it was just really easy to sleep under there. Maybe also slightly lower oxygen levels, except for one aquanaut. There's a photographer called Kip Evans. He complained that there were these silver fish that kept swimming near his bedroom porthole and reflecting the outside lights into his eyes. And he complained about that, which, okay, fine. Speaking, because it's all helium, it turns out they could understand each other reasonably well because it seems that the brain adjusts to the high pitch voices, and so they could talk. But when they're trying to talk to people above the surface using like telephones and so on, it's essentially impossible for the people on the surface to understand their high-pitched, rapid speech. It was a problem. I'm wondering if they actually, it doesn't say, I couldn't find anywhere to say it specifically. I'm wondering if they would record it and slow them down to lower the pitch.
Yeah, it would make a lot of sense.
Toilets were also quite difficult because they just sort of had like a little hut outside the habitat they'd swim out and go to the toilet in. But all the fish learnt that there was feeding time when these people... It's quite grotesque, really, but the fish would come and eat the poo.
Yep.
Some of the fish would get a little bit enthusiastic and would give people little nips. So they had to set up a special air bubble curtain that would like shoot compressed air into the water to keep the fish away so that you didn't get little nips on your private bits. So anyway, it's pretty interesting. There's a whole bunch of other things that they looked there at, your thinking, your psychological stability, your isolation and boredom, and, what sort of limits you had.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is going into this science fiction notion of having underwater cities.
Yeah.
And much like, I suppose it's much like having a moon colony. Turns out it's really impractical and difficult to have an underwater city.
Yeah.
Because these habitats they had, they reckon you could get them a bit bigger, which make them a little bit more comfortable, but maintaining the air quality is quite difficult because you're in a sealed system. And it's also then, once you get above a certain population, how do you evacuate people in the case of an emergency? If there's a bit of a breach, how do you evacuate? Because you need to decompress on the way back up. Otherwise, you all die when you get to the surface.
Yeah. In
terrible fashion. And then there's food problems. How do you grow food? There's no natural sunlight. You'd have to use artificial light. Same sort of problems you get like trying to live on the moon. Like the atmosphere is just hostile, and you'd only do it if the alternative was worse.
Yeah.
So I thought it was pretty interesting that all of this kicked off 1962. It was all underwater living and different breathing. And this movie was set at that same sort of time where all of this research into underwater living was going on. I don't know if Guillermo particularly chose that time for that reason, or if that's just convenient or coincidental that there was a lot of research going on at that time. So I think if Guillermo wants to get in contact with us and enlighten us, that would be awesome. Or his co-writer there, Vanessa. But I have to ask anyone listening to this, if you could live in an underwater habitat, do you think you'd be happy doing so? And I don't mean like visit it for a couple of days to say, oh, this is interesting. But, you're going to rent an apartment in an underwater habitat and go to work down there and live there for maybe a couple of years. Because personally, it sounds like a horror story waiting to happen.
It was definitely one of those things that when I was a kid and you saw those things, and, even in Where's Wally, I'm sure there's probably an underwater world, and, probably there was, I'm just trying to remember like a film or, parts of these sort of ideas or little stories probably based on this guy from the 60s. It sounds cool, doesn't it? It sounds really cool as a kid, but then when you start to think about the practicality, it is like a horror movie, really.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you'd have to have, I suppose if you had a large enough habitat, and it's the same with like living on the moon or the Mars, if you had a large enough habitat that it felt open, like, so that you had trees and houses inside a big dome, which is because that's the way they portray it, isn't it? Like this big domed city, and inside the city looks just like, there's parks and there's houses and there's farmland and stuff.
Totally different.
It never really explains how the sunlight gets in there, but nonetheless, like that would probably be okay.
Yeah, that would be fine, wouldn't it? But because that's just pretty much what we live in now. It's just plonked in the ocean. Yeah, in reality, it's these little tiny hubs, cohabs, and even that stuff that you were talking about. Oh, you have to go outside to do a poo, and then the fish are going to eat your poo butthole while you poo. That was never in the stories when I was a kid.
No, it's sort of one of those details they gloss over, don't they? It's the whole going to the toilet bit. They never really explained how the fish man went to the toilet in this movie.
No.
Whether he just did it in the bathtub.
That's right. He just probably...
You could imagine Eliza going, oh, for goodness sakes, I told you not to do it in the bath.
There's a toilet.
I've got to change the water again now.
That's it. All right. Well, that's really interesting science anyway, this idea of being underwater and, the capacity that we have as humans. And yeah, you're right. There's a lot of connection to living on Mars or living on the moon. Sorry, not in the moon. So if you're out there...
I know that they are talking about building underground bases. So in the moon is probably true.
Okay. Well, there we go. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode talking about The Shape of Water. Let us know what you thought about the film. Hopefully you went and saw it. I'd well recommend watching this film. It's really an entertaining, moving masterpiece of cinema storytelling. Go check it out. Let us know.
I really loved, actually, like we described, it follows a 3-act structure, but not slavishly to one character through a story. It's good to show that there's different interpretations like this.
Definitely.
You can move beyond what might seem to be confining bounds.
Yeah, well and truly. Yeah, and that same but different thing that we talked about as well, that I could see some similarities in this film to E.T., but I don't think that was the homaging that he was doing, but I just mean from a narrative point of view, there's definitely those beats. And without going through it on a fine-tooth comb, I can definitely see some connect. So what's our next film for next week's episode, Surrey?
Next week, we're going to be going back in time, and we're going to be revisiting one of our previous, I suppose, favourite scriptwriters, John Sayles. We've got The Battle Beyond the Stars. So this was... back when Star Wars was making such a splash, everyone wanted to have their big space opera epic. And this is one is quite memorable. I'm pretty sure I have seen it, like when I was really little or something.
Yeah.
But I'm keen to watch it again. It's available. Google it. You can rent it. It costs like a couple of bucks or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Maybe you find it in an op shop. Probably not, because it's probably a little bit too vintage now. It's like 1970 or something.
Yep.
1980, around that vintage. Like it's Star Warsy time.
Yeah. So go check it out. You'll find it online somewhere, and we will be talking about next week, next episode. Sorry, can't wait to get my sticky chops around that one. Please think about giving us a 5-star rating or writing a review on whichever podcast service you are listening to us on. If it's Apple, it's Spotify, or all the other ones that are out there. Give us a bit of a tick or a box or a star or subscribe, follow, something. And you can also find us on spacebrains.com, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and
spacebrains.com.au.
Yep. Yep. And the festival, you will find we've got a new website, but you can also find it through the plethora of other websites that are out there, and also our social media. So go check it out. And if you got something that you'd like us to do, or look at a particular film, or want to sponsor us, hit us up. Send us some feedback.
We're talking to you, Guillermo.
All right, we'll catch you next time. That's bye for now.
Bye.
Ciao.